Hello and welcome to the next part of our .NET Core 5 tutorial series. And in the previous video, we created the ability to create ingredients. And if we just quickly take it for a spin here, we can see that we have this page where we can go into the ingredients. There we go. And then we will be able to see a list of our current ingredients, and we will be able to create a new ingredient. Great, so that's 2 of the 4 CRUD operations that we need. And the next one we're going to tackle is the update part. So we want to be able to actually edit one of these ingredients. So the way that we do that is, first of all, to implement a sort of update button here on the index view. So I go into my Visual Studio project right here, and we go into the ingredients index file. Then right here where we print out all the ingredients, we will create a edit row, and we will have a button for each row that says edit. And it's basically just a link we want to display as a button. So we're going to make a link with a class of btn danger, so we get this yellow button. We're going to make it a form control so it fills up all the space. And we will call it, edit. And then we will put the ASP4, ASP action, there we go, and say that we want to go to the edit page of the ingredients controller, because it knows that we are talking about the ingredients controller because we are currently in a file associated with that controller. We could also say ASP controller and specify which controller we want to go to. But in this case, it's just going to be the same. So I save that and I update my page, and we should get a link. Okay, there we go. So we have the edit button right there, displayed in the wrong color. I put danger. Just going to replace that with warning. And there we go. We have the yellow button right now. So right now it just goes to the edit page, but it needs to know what kind of ingredient, which particular row do we want to edit. So we need somehow to put the ID in there. And the way we do that is simply we go down here and we can pass on the ASP route ID. There we go. And the route ID will be this particular ingredient's ID. So this ASP route ID is a special way that we can pass data to the particular controller methods. This will actually be displayed as a parameter in the method we are going into in the controller. And remember, this right here, when we just put the @ symbol, it just means we're writing C# code and we are accessing the ingredient's ID, and the ingredient is the ingredient we are currently enumerating in our list of ingredients. You know, where we get the ID out here and the name, so the same thing we're doing right here. So now we have the actual link set up. Let's just try and save this and then refresh the page here. And if we hover over this one, you can see in the lower left corner where it displays the actual link, the URL is the localhost /ingredient/edit/1, because this has an ID of 1, and the other one has /2 and /3 and /4. So it appends it to the URL like that. So now that we've created the link, we need to actually create the page where we are going into, and we do that in the ingredients controller, and we want to implement the get part of the edit method. So whenever we push that link button, it's going to be a get request. So we make a new method we call edit, and the ID is getting passed in as a parameter to this method, and we simply catch it by saying that this method might have an ID. It's sort of optional because we don't know if the user actually puts it in. I mean, you could go into your browser and just type in the URL manually and leave out the ID. In that case, you wouldn't have one. So the very first thing we have to do is, be wary of the user input. We always have to do that. So we have to verify that we actually have an ID. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to see if ID is null, or if the ID, or if the ID is 0. If it's any one of those, we will simply return not found. Because if the ID is null, that means no ID was passed in. So we can't very well look for an ingredient with no ID. And also, since our IDs start with a 1 and then increment, so they go like 1, 2, 3, and 4, it shouldn't ever be 0. So we can rule that one out as well. Usually, in theory, you could probably just check for null, but usually there's like, when you're programming this sort of thing where, whenever you test for null, you also sort of test for the 0 value. Like for a string, you might test that the string is either null or that is just an empty string. So it's the same theory that we are working with right here. So if it's any of those cases, we return not found, which is just a really handy way of just return the 404 not found response of the HTTP request. So if we get to this point, that means the ID was actually set. So we will now find object to edit. So the way we find a single object is actually really easy. We know we want an ingredient, so we create this variable of type ingredients. We can ask our database ingredients table to find an ingredient with the ID passed in. Simple as that. We ask the database ingredients table to find the ingredient with this ID that we get passed in right there. And that's all it takes. This single line fetches out the ingredient from the database. Right here we just have an extra check where we check that the ingredient is null, and if it is, again, we would return a not found request. That means we searched for the ingredient but we couldn't find it. So if we get to this part, that means we found the ingredient, we had an ID, everything is well. So we can return the edit view with the ingredient object passed into it as the model. Great, so this is our edit method. Now we need to actually create the view for it. But let's just quickly recap what it's doing. We go back into the index method. We have the link created where we have the route ID we pass in right here. The route ID is then passed in as a parameter to the edit method. We verify the ID is set. We get the ingredient, verify we found an ingredient, and return out putting the ingredient as a model in that view. So now I right click on the edit here and I press add view, because now we need to create the view. So we create a new razor view, press add, and we just let the scaffolding run. There we go. So I simply just delete everything and I'll make a new container. I'll make a new row. I make a column that fills everything. I put a header that says edit ingredients. There we go. So I will just try to run this as is and see if we can actually get to that page and that our routing is working. So we press edit on the meat here. And there we go. We are now in the ingredients controller, edit, and then we're looking for the ingredient with ID 1. And we simply get displayed, edit ingredients. Great. So in this view, remember we passed in the, let's just see if we can find it. Right here, we pass in an ingredient object. So that means in this view, we can tell it that the model you are using is of type ingredients. So if we do that, we can simply say, instead of saying edit ingredient, we could say edit, and put the @ symbol, say model with a capital M, dot name. So we get the name property. So now if we run this again, it should say that we are now editing meat. Great, so now we know this is working, we know we have the right ingredients. So now we just need to put out the fields so that we can edit its information. And I will simply create a new row. I will make one that is just, let's say, call 5. This is also going to be a form group. And we are going to have an input. And then we use the ASP4 because this is an input for the name. And you can see it actually also completes name here because it knows we are working with this particular model. So it's a really handy way because when you're coding, you can sort of just speak like in English, you know, I'm making an input field and this is for the property name in our model right here. So it's really beautiful. And we're also going to give it a class of form control. We are also going to make a label. We can also use ASP4 here and simply state name. So this label will be the label for this input field because they are both referencing the same property in our model. And we'll simply say name like that. So we take this for a spin and we get our little text field right here. And you can also see that meat, the current value, has already been put into the text box. So that is absolutely beautiful. So the last thing that's left to do is simply create a button to submit the changes we make. And before we do that, we have to actually create a form and place everything inside this form, because if we don't do that, we can't very well have a button that submits, can we? So we're going to make an input of type submit, and it's going to have a class of btn info. So it's going to be this blue info button. Going to make it form control so it fills up everything, and its value is just going to be update. Close this one off, and I just put a label in here that just says update. Is simply just to quickly align everything. There we go, because if I didn't put this one in, the button would float up here and it wouldn't be aligned. So there we go. Now we have the fields that we want to edit right here, and we can press the update button. But remember, if we press the update button, we are sending a post request to our ingredients controller. So we're sending a post request to go to the edit method because we're not specifying we're going to a new page. So it will submit to the edit page. And if you go in here, if we go to the edit method again, it's not really going to work because we're not doing anything here other than taking out the ingredient. So it would just fail because we're not supplying an ID and we're not saving anything. So we need to create a post method for the edit part, just like we did with the create here. We had a get create and we had a post create. So we make our post edit method. Again, it returns an IX result. We call it edit. And in here, we can put in the ingredient as an object because we're not passing in an ID. We are actually submitting the ingredient model up here. And it knows all this because if we go into the edit method here, we are specifying that this page works with a model of type ingredient. So when it submits this page, it's going to wrap everything up in an ingredient model, and that model is going to be put into the parameter here of this method. So again, this is all the beauty of ASP. If you're following these conventions and doing it like this, everything, it has all these nice little hooks where it, kind of just performs some sort of a magic touch and makes it work for you. So now that we have this ingredient, we need to, well, wait, before we actually do that, we need to specify that this is the HTTP post, and we also do the validate the anti-forgery token, just like we did with the create. So first, again, we check if the model state is valid. Again, just as we did with the create, and if it is, we will ask our database's ingredients table to update the ingredient that we pass in right here. Then we tell the database to save the changes, and that should be it. Then we can just return a redirect to action and go back to the index method so we can get a list of all our ingredients and see it works. And if this fails, we will simply return the view with the ingredients. So we'll go back to the same page with the same ingredient object. So let's save this and take it for a spin and see if it works. So we're going to take it from the top, going into the ingredients. Then we find something we want to edit. Let's say we want to edit the meat, and we want to change it to be named beef instead. We press update, and we go back to the ingredients table, and we can see that it has now been renamed to beef. And again, if we press edit, it's now called beef, and we could edit it again if we wanted to. And that's all there is to it. Now we can both create and we can edit our ingredients. So before we wrap up, again, let's quickly recap, because when you're doing it for the first few times, it can feel a little daunting. There's a lot of things you have to remember. So I think it's a good idea to recap it and just get a general idea of how you would implement this behavior. So first of all, we get the link where we provide this ASP route ID with the ID of the particular object we want to manipulate. And then if we go into the ingredients controller, the method right here will maybe be passed in an ID. So we just have to verify that it does. We can fetch it out and pop it into a view. Now that view will have the particular model, and we'll simply load up all the fields with it and create a post method to a method of the same name. And that's the method we have right here. So it's the same name, but it's the post version. It takes in the object, because now we're coming from a view that actually packs all this into an object. We check the model state, update it, or update this particular ingredient. We save it, and we redirect back to the index method. And that's all there is to it. So now we have implemented the create that we have up here, and the read part we have right here. We have the update right here. So now we just need a way to delete the ingredients, and we have been through all 4 CRUD operations. And the last one, the delete, is the one we're going to tackle in the next video. So thanks a lot for watching. And again, if you've made this far into the series, just please hit that subscribe button, or a like or a comment or whatever to help promote the video. And yeah, I'll see you next time.